and welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster planning, emergency management, crisis management, business continuity, COVID, anything that's related to those subjects. Speaking of which, if there is something you'd like us to talk about on the show, please feel free, go to the Voice America page for the show. There is a button underneath the graphic. You can send me an email. I do respond to all emails. I also want to just thank everybody at solutionsreview.com who added my book, Testing Disaster Recovery and Business Continuity Plans, to their 16 most essential books for business continuity directors. Thanks everyone there, and thanks to the other 15 people that make the list as well. I have actually all those books, so I'm really honored to be on that list. For months, you've all heard me talk about attending and speaking at the Continuity and Resilience Today conference. And I'd said if I was lucky enough, I'd start bringing on some of the speakers who wanted to come onto the show and talk about what they presented at the CRT conference. And today is one of those days. I'm lucky enough, I actually got to talk to him last week. When the CRT conference was being held for a short, brief period as I was hosting a live channel. And he's come back today. He agreed to come back and talk about the session that he held at the CRT conference. So I'd like to welcome to the show today Mark Hoffman. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. Hey, it's a pleasure to be here, and congratulations on the book and on getting put on that list, too. That was pretty cool.
Yes, thank you. It was quite a surprise for me, let me tell you, especially when I had 15 other books on that list, and I thought, how did mine get there?
No kidding, right?
But I'm quite humbled and honored to be on that list. So thank you for that. Mark, I know you and I chatted last week, and so I know a little bit about you. But could you give our listeners, because we have listeners literally around the globe, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you got into what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally from the great state of New Jersey, the Garden State, down in the southern part where we don't say things like, hey, forget about it, stuff like that, down where we just actually do kind of more farming and things like that. But say about 20 years or so ago, I left New Jersey and I came to the Toronto area, and I've lived here since, and about 3.5 years ago became a Canadian citizen.
Yay!
Yeah, that's right. You mean yay, A.
Yay,
so I have been doing business continuity for, I don't know, the last 20, 25 years, something like that. And it all started for me actually back in the 1980s when I was working as a database administrator for a company, and we had a guy come in, and he started talking to us about disaster recovery. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. And the more he talked about it, the more I thought, man, this is really where I want to focus. But I was never able to really get into that area, and I just kind of continued to pursue my IT career and do different things, but it was always just kind of hanging in the back of my mind of something that I was really interested in, but I just didn't really have any idea how to do it. And then you remember everybody, we all got involved in the whole Y2K thing, which is really, in its own way, a business continuity event. And so that got me a little bit more traction in that area. And coming out of that, I started to do more in the business continuity area and continued to work in disaster recovery. And then it seemed like the more and more IT jobs that I got, they were more in the management area. And so I always looked to try to protect whatever company I was working for through these, good practices around disaster recovery. And it just kind of, blossomed from there. And so today I'm the founder and president of a small consulting firm here in the Toronto area. I have clients all over Canada and in the U.S. and Caribbean and in Europe. And I've never been busier. I've never been happier. I just absolutely love what I do. And I feel like now that I've been able to really build the career in this, area, I just feel like I'm doing what I was built to do. Like this was what I was meant to be doing, and I just absolutely love it.
That's great to hear. A lot of people, don't say that. So that's really good to hear. So I'm glad you could find the time to come and share your experiences with us.
I'm happy
Now,
to do it.
at CRT, your conference, your session, I should say, was Cyber Attack Response, a focus on resilience and reputation. Now,
Right.
when we spoke during the live channel during CRT for 10 minutes or so, you suggested that there's kind of two work streams happening during a cyber attack, because usually most of us think a cyber attack, it's IT only, but you've said that there's kind of two work streams happening. Can you kind of explain to our viewers what you mean by two work streams happening here?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, it still confuses people, and there are still people who think that I'm a cyber expert in the sense that, I can do the firewalls and the intrusion detection and the forensics work, and that's not it at all. Like, I'm interested in that, but that's not my specialty. Mm-hmm. What I had said was that for the longest time, people have treated cyber as a risk or an incident that IT could handle by themselves. And those days are done. We can't look at it that way anymore. We have to think beyond the technology. And so in addition to that technology work stream of firewalls and intrusion detection and cyber response and forensics and containment and all of that, which is absolutely necessary. We have to do those things. But in parallel to that, there needs to be a crisis management work stream, something that can understand the impact of the incident on the business operation, something that can have a prescribed approach when it comes to our communication requirements, working to protect our reputation, handling legal and privacy aspects, and ultimately getting to a point where we can make good decisions coming out of the incident. And so while the technology team is working, the crisis management team and the business continuity leaders need to be executing their plan as well to help keep that business operating.
So with crisis management teams or business continuity management teams, how do you get technology on board with something like that, with cyber attacks? And the reason I ask that is I've worked in security and business continuity teams. And a lot of times when there was an IT incident using cyber attack or anything along those lines, it became a separate process, and business continuity was either ignored or became an afterthought. So how do you bring them together to want to work together? How do you get them to understand that they do need to be together?
I've been fortunate because the 4 different clients that I've put this type of a response plan together for, in 3 of them, well, actually in all of them, what we had was amazing leadership. In 3 of them, we had amazing executive sponsorship. So the executive sponsor was able to look out over the areas that he or she were responsible for and say to technology, I need you in with this. And then also to the business continuity management program, I need you to run this. And so we were able to generate that momentum because we got it right from the executive sponsorship. On the 4th organization that I did this with, it was actually IT who said, look, we recognize this is beyond us, that there are decisions that have to be made that are not technology related. Are we going to pay the ransom? Are we going to engage our cyber insurance company? Are we going to negotiate with the threat actors? Are we going to engage law enforcement? What's our communication requirements? Things like that. And so, it really comes down to good leadership.
I guess using that approach too, just hearing what you said, it allows the teams involved to actually focus on their expertise rather than trying to manage everything themselves.
Yeah, I don't remember if I said this to you when we chatted last week or whether I actually said it in my session, but one of my favorite things to do during an exercise is to bring all of these experts to the table to run an exercise and to present them with a plausible scenario, and then watch the privacy people talk about, all the different aspects of notification or reporting and things like that, and watch legal have their view and inject themselves into different things while technology is, adding their component to it. It's amazing to watch when you have people from all the different areas of the company that you need to draw on and bring together, and they come and they're engaged and they can respond. It's a lot of fun to watch.
I think you did touch on that, but I agree with you completely. I think a problem with some of the testing that happens today, especially with cyber stuff, anything related to cyber incidents, it tends to stay in an IT realm. But yet, as you describe, there are other ramifications, and they need to also discuss what they would do.
The biggest challenge that I've run into, and I've run into it a number of times, is that the IT people, particularly the information security teams and so forth, you need to get them engaged early on and make sure they have bought in on whatever scenario you want to run. You want to run a ransomware attack, that's fine. Pick the system, work on it together. What you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have the InfoSec team or your IT team start pushing back on you in the middle of the exercise. Well, that's not plausible. Yeah. That would never happen. Or what will tend to be happen? I had a VP of information security tell me one day, this scenario you want to run is throwing rocks at my program. It's making me look like we're not prepared. And I said, well, we're not actually going to take your network down here. We're just simulating what would happen. He said, I don't even want to admit to the executive team that it's a possibility. Pick another scenario. Wow. So it's important to get those people engaged and on board early on.
Now you got me thinking of something else. I know of organizations that have cyber teams and information security. Is there a difference in your mind to those, or are they one and the same?
I think every organization puts their own spin on it. It seems like the one organization, they had a very large IT department, well over 150 people, and then they had a 4 or 5 person information security team. Another client I'm working with right now, kind of the same thing, smaller scale, but the same type of thing. And what has to happen is that the information security team and IT have to collaborate. They have to work together. And the best way I can describe that is, if you think about backups, right? And there was a report I read recently that said of those surveyed who had experienced a ransomware attack, 61% said they restored their systems from backups. So they either restored or reinstalled the systems. They didn't even, consider paying ransom, right? So if you're going to do something like that, then your information security people, the people who know what they should have the ins and outs of this to protect those clean copies of backups and things, they need to work with the IT teams who are implementing those strategies. And so there has to be that integration between those two teams. But to answer your original question, I see it somewhat segregated, sort of as a rule. Sometimes you'll have, kind of a lead person in IT have some information security responsibility. That would be probably more true for smaller organizations. But for the most part, there is a bit of a segregation of those duties.
And I think that's, I've got some questions to ask you as we move to the next section with COVID. And so I think I'm going to end our first segment a little bit early, just because I know once we start talking of COVID and what's happening now, we'll probably just keep going. So we've come to the end of our first segment. We're talking with crisis management expert Mark Hoffman, and we will be right back. Welcome back to the show. Today we are talking with crisis management expert Mark Hoffman. Mark, in our first segment, we were talking about the testing, and during our little break here, you started to get quite passionate about the example that you started to give us. So why don't you take that opportunity, and you don't have to name who it is, of course, but take that opportunity to talk about that a little further.
So Yeah, you're right. I did get a little worked up, and it was interesting because we were just talking about, testing and working with leadership and working with the information security teams and so forth. And so we had a client who was in, just let's say the widget business, and I wanted to run a cyber exercise saying that their widget system got hacked. And I wanted to see how the executives would respond to it. And the executive sponsor of the program, would not let me run that test. And I asked him why. And he said, because it's too sensitive. I don't want our board to know we're testing that. And I said, no, you got it exactly flipped upside down. You want your board to know we're testing it. But he was afraid to fail. And the problem is, you cannot test just to pass. It's not a test. You have to run your exercise. Right. You have to be willing to accept the results of that exercise and then build off of that. You run an after-action report. You run a lessons learned meeting. You identify what worked and what didn't work, and you can't be afraid of that outcome because you would rather find that out. There I go, getting passionate again. You would rather find that out, in the controlled environment of an exercise, rather than finding out what, in a real incident when there's really a gun pointed at your head and you have to make a decision. So, that's something to be aware of.
I've had some of those same experiences where we've had to change, the scope of the test or the scenario, the focus, whatever you want to call it, simply because people were too afraid of what the outcome was going to be. And that told me they already knew what the outcome was going to be.
And that's right. And you know what? This was not a technology test, right? This was that parallel line. This was the crisis management response portion of what we were trying to test. So it didn't matter. It didn't make the slightest difference what system we were simulating, right? We were still trying to test their readiness from a decision-making standpoint and from a communication standpoint and privacy and legal and so forth. And whatever system it was we happened to pick for our simulation was completely meaningless, but that was lost on that particular executive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've kind of experienced that myself, like I said. So let's move on to another part of your presentation, cybercrime and COVID-19. Now, you suggest, or not suggest, but you've stated that, cybercrime is on the increase with COVID-19. Why is that?
Well, we're seeing a lot, and it's not just me saying it, right? So we're hearing from Interpol, and we're hearing from the U.S. Department of Treasury that basically what's happening is cyber criminals are upping their game. They're boosting their attacks throughout COVID, and they're doing it really at an alarming rate because, well, first of all, they have so many more points of contact, so many more opportunities. With everyone working from home, there's that much more of a surface area for them to attack. Mm-hmm. And so what we're seeing is things like Barracuda Networks is talking about the number of phishing scams going up, over 600% through the course of the pandemic, or remote desktop protocols, the brute force attacks on them up, 400%, particularly early on in the pandemic. Why? Well, because everybody was rushing to get their people up and running from home, and so in their haste, there were some vulnerabilities there, right? But then, even other groups like the Skybox Security had a vulnerability report, and they said they're seeing like a 75% increase in ransomware attacks just since the beginning of the pandemic. So, we're seeing a lot of activity right now. And so you think, well, okay, we got our hands full with COVID-19, but you can't turn your eye off the ball and ignore cyber because you'll get burned if you do.
So, let's say I'm working from home for whoever a client is, and I'm working here, and they've given me a desktop and everything. What kind of measures do I need to keep my eyes open for? If the cybercrime, is going up, and we already get so many emails throughout a day anyway, either through work or personal. What kind of things do I need to keep my eyes open for to make sure that I'm clicking on the right stuff?
Right. Well, that's right. And I did a program not too long ago where I said, don't be too quick to click. And that's really the main area that we can focus on, is to educate our users, the users who are working from home, keep them up to date to be alert for phishing attacks, and give them tangible, practical, and easy to follow instructions for what to do to make sure that a link is a valid link, or to make sure they're not clicking on things that they shouldn't, because that's really where the vast majority of these attacks are starting, is when people are clicking things that they shouldn't be clicking.
Well, a quick story, you just reminded me something. The last client I had, what they did is they would tell us ahead of time that, we are on an ongoing basis, at irregular intervals, we are going to send out fake emails, and we're going to measure, the response. Are people really paying attention to what they get? So they would send us emails, hey, Alex, that report you wanted is, now available. Click on this link. And they would, monitor the statistics to find out how well the message is getting out, and, if we're paying attention. And, I could report something, with a little button in my email saying this is phishing, this is fake, or whatever the case may be. And Exactly. It really worked. I thought that was a very interesting way of doing it.
And you're right, and that's what a lot of companies are doing. And October is Cybersecurity Month, so a lot of companies are working on that right now. And it's helpful, right? Because the more you practice it, and I always tell people, practice like you play, right? Do it like you're going to do it for real. And the more you can educate your user base, then the better off that'll be. The other thing, too, is to, use some case studies or use some examples. And so me being an independent consultant and going around and working with different clients, I get to tell this story without throwing anybody under the bus. I'm throwing them under the bus, but nobody knows the person I'm throwing under the bus, so it's okay. But I had a client who has only ever had one successfully executed cyber attack, and that came through an email where someone was posing as this person's boss and asked them to click on a document. And when this user clicked on the document, it asked for her username and password. And when she put it in, the hacker got it and got access to their HR systems, files showing payroll information, pension information, banking, all the, everything that you would not want to be, exposed. Yeah. And what ends up happening is, first of all, it causes the privacy breach, and then it costs the company a lot of money because they had to offer credit monitoring and do all of the remediation work. But the person who clicked on it felt like a complete heel, like they actually, almost had to take time off because they felt so badly that they exposed the information of all of their colleagues.
Yeah, that's got to be tough. That's, I guess that's when HR gets involved, but in a different way, in almost a supporting role, to help that person so that they don't,
Yeah, the worst thing is this person worked in HR, so.
Oh. Okay. So based on that example that you just gave, what options, and there is a ransomware attack, or cyber breach, what options are open to organizations? Like, how do we respond? Do we just shut everything down, run away, pay money? What kind of things are open to us? Or to organizations, I should say.
Yeah, it's a fair question. The first thing you do is, when the cyber attack occurs, should not be the first time you're having these conversations. So I like to lead organizations through 7 to 10 questions that they're very likely going to have to answer when they get into the middle of let's say it's a ransomware attack. And the first one is, and not emotionally, but just based on your company's core values and your principles and your risk appetite and what industry you're in and the reputational impact, I want them to answer to me, are you likely to pay a ransom or not? And most times, more and more now, people are much willing to say, no, I'm not going to pay the ransom. Now, the problem with that is, just to go off on a side tangent here for a second, is that we're also starting to see cyber criminals are upping the game here by saying to people, okay, that's fine. If you don't pay the ransom, we're now going to release your data into the public. So now a ransomware attack, which locks a system and prevents use, is now turning into a data breach, which is a whole other kettle of fish. So, that ups the game. But rather than thinking about it for the first time when you first find out that you've been hacked, you need to pre-plan these things. So your options are to, again, go back with your information security team and your IT team to build adequate backup strategies that isolate backups so that systems can be rebuilt, or that you have robust intrusion detection systems, or that you have, the proper forensic teams on call that can come in and help you with these things. So, the options really are kind of, they kind of center around, are we going to pay the ransom or not? And then if we are, that's one sort of path that we take. But if we're not going to pay the ransom, then we need to be thinking about communications, particularly if there's going to be the potential for a data breach. We need to be thinking about internal restoration of the system, whether it's installing from scratch and rebuilding or restoring from backups. And, so you have these different things. But then along with that, you have to understand, what are our communication requirements? What are our privacy law requirements? How do we notify people? What do we need to do to protect our reputation and things along those lines? And the interesting thing about these decisions is that they can change over time. And I'll give you an example. The city of Baltimore, in May of 2019, had a major ransomware attack. And the ransom demand was like 13 bitcoins at the time. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $75,000 or maybe $80,000. And the city of Baltimore said, no, we're not paying this ransom. All right, that's fine. That's a good decision. There's nothing wrong with that decision. So then they turned IT loose and they said, go recover our systems. And after about 6 or 7 weeks, IT said, well, we can't. Now think about that. Think about the business continuity implication and the impact on the organization, whether it's a city or, a private company or whatever, of your major systems being down for 6 weeks. Like, that's crazy. So they brought in some consultants. They couldn't help. They brought in more consultants. They couldn't help. But they stood their ground. They said, we're not paying this ransom. And the latest I heard was that the tab for recovery was somewhere in the neighborhood of $18 million.
Wow.
Against a $76,000 ransom. Now, I'm not saying paying the ransom in that case was right, but at some point, you have to be able to reevaluate the situation and say, okay, maybe we need to rethink. And so you talk about, well, what are your different options? What you should be saying is, our default position on paying ransom is no, we are not going to pay ransom unless there is some kind of a compelling case that sways us off of that position. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, in this particular case, 6 weeks down, you could have reevaluated that and said, well, that might be swaying us off that position. But that's the approach I take. 7 or 8 kind of key questions, build a default position, but then anticipate what those considerations might be and be willing to revisit your position on those key decisions.
Based on that, if I'm given, a request for $100,000 or whatever, are there ramifications if, I do pay it right off the bat? Are there legal problems or branding, anything like that, reputation by paying it?
Again, it's going to depend on a couple of things. And just recently, in early October, as a matter of fact, the U.S. Department of Treasury put out a statement. Their Office of Foreign Assets Control has suggested now that they might actually fine U.S. people or companies who facilitate ransomware payments to certain cyber actors. So they have put different cyber actors, the Lazarus Group, et cetera, and different things on a sanction list. And their view, and they're not wrong, is that companies that facilitate ransomware payments are allowing them, enabling them to continue with their illicit, activities. So they're trying to prohibit people from engaging in those transactions. So that's something to be aware of. Now, we're in Canada, but you have listeners all over the world. I have not yet looked into this to see if, other countries are implementing, similar potential fines for violating these regulations. The other thing to be aware of is kind of depends on the company. If it's a company that is protecting a portfolio, for example, or certain investments, and but you could be called either way with this, right? So let's say the example I gave about the city of Baltimore was a company that was supposed to be protecting a series of investments, and they didn't pay, and it cost $18 million against that portfolio. The stakeholders of the portfolio could be significantly irritated with the fact that they could have gotten off for $70,000, but it cost $18 million. Now, the other side of that is they could have paid the $70,000, and the stakeholders could have gone, "What are you doing? That's our money. You can't give that away." So that's why part of this also has to include understanding your reputation management requirements and your communication requirements.
Right. And I know there you've got the next section that I want to talk to you about are what do you call it? 4x4 things to consider. So I'm going to leave that to our next segment because I think that's a perfect lead into that section.
All right, that sounds great.
We've come to the end of our second segment. We are talking with crisis management expert Mark Hoffman, and we'll be right back. And welcome back to the show. Today we are talking with crisis management expert Mark Hoffman. Mark, great first and second segment. This last segment, I want to talk about something you have in your presentation about 4x4 things to consider. Can you explain what those 4 things are and what you mean by 4x4?
Yeah, so basically I wanted to focus on some things that people can do to start to consider that parallel work stream, that crisis management work stream. And what I did was I've come up with 4 specific areas, and then with each of those 4 specific areas, I have 4 kind of key points. So very quickly off the top, the 4 areas would be cyber insurance, communicating after a cyber attack, 4 ways to integrate your business continuity program into your cyber response, and then 4 specific things that you can do now. And there are some things that people might be looking at this and listening to this and thinking, I haven't done anything in this whole parallel work stream thing. Where do I start? And so that's why I wanted to try to bring out these 4 areas.
Well, can you talk about the first one? It's cyber insurance. What is that, and what do we need to understand about it?
The first thing that we need to understand, the first thing I would encourage people to go find out is, does your organization have cyber insurance, yes or no? When I mentioned the city of Baltimore, they did not have cyber insurance. So that was part of, I think, their decision in, as to whether they're going to pay that ransom or not, right? So the first thing that I want people to understand is whether or not you have it. But then once you find out whether you have it or not, understand the scope of that coverage. Understand what it is that it's going to cover for you. Is it going to cover data that's in data centers all around the world, or is it just a specific geographic area or a specific jurisdiction? Is it going to cover data that's on your laptops or data that's on your phone, or is it non-electronic data? It will just cover data that's in documents and filing cabinets and so forth. So understand the scope of that coverage, including policy limits and and things like that. Which leads me to the next thing, which is understanding policy exclusions. I was doing a review for a client one time of their cyber insurance policy, and this particular policy said that any data breach that was caused by a laptop that got exposed, and that laptop was not encrypted, it made the policy null and void. It would not cover that particular claim. And when I went back and asked the head of IT about that, I said, "Did you know about this exclusion?" And he said, "No, he wasn't even aware of it." I said, "Are you encrypting your laptops?" And he said, "No." So they were in for a potential rude awakening right down the road. So it's really good to understand those exclusions. The third thing in this segment is to understand what added value your insurer is going to bring to the table. A lot of times they'll bring in a breach coach, or they'll have relationships with world-class forensic teams or legal teams or privacy teams, public relations, things like that. So try to understand those things. And then the last one, and this is super important, make sure you understand the process for engaging the insurer at time of incident. You want to get them to the table as early as you can. You don't want to get offside, or you don't want to get ahead of them where you start making decisions and taking actions that they haven't authorized, because they're going to cover a lot of the costs that you're going to incur as you go through this. So it's really important to understand how to engage the insurer at time of incident.
So then the next one I think you talked about was communicate well. That kind of goes without saying, isn't it?
Well, it does, but do people? Wow, boy, there's just too much to talk about there. So I'll try to keep this, down the middle of the road here and not get too far out of bounds. But we live in a world right now where people don't communicate effectively, and a lot of times things get distorted or spun or whatever. And when we're talking about crisis communications, whether it's in cyber or any other type of crisis, there is a 4-step process that I like to follow. And the first one is to just come out and own what happened. Start right there. Whether it's a notification letter to affected parties, or whether it's a statement in a press release or in a press conference, it's important to own what happened. Hey, we're here to let you know that we're the victims of a cyber attack that did blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's the very first thing. Own it. The second thing is, now you can add some context. Right? Don't start by adding context. Add context after you've owned it. Right? So you can put some details to the incident. And so a good example would be, maybe we were the victim of a distributed denial of service attack that took our online servers offline. Right? So that's the opening statement. We're letting you know, or yes, our systems were down for 12 hours because we were the victims of this denial of service attack. The context is, and it's important context, no data was exposed or even threatened to be exposed as a result of this attack. That's excellent context. Add that in there. The third thing is to talk about your plans. What are you going to do about it? Have you learned something out of it? Have you changed your process? Have you decided to add a forensic team? You can talk about what you're going to do to either make sure it doesn't happen again or to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. And then once you've owned it and expressed context and then talked about your plans to remediate it, then you get permission to ask for your customers' continued confidence in what you're doing. And so those are the 4 steps in the communication piece.
And your next one is, ways business continuity can help. Now, this one should be interesting. How can the BCM or BCP, whatever their team name is, how do they get involved?
You asked me early on about integrating different parts of the team, and I said it really needs to come from good leadership. And this is where you're going to build, think of it as sort of a people sitting around a table, and I know right now nobody's sitting around tables except for virtually, so maybe I should say think of it as a Zoom call with all these boxes, and you have on that call your cyber lead and your IT technology lead, legal, privacy, communications, HR, and all of the different people that you need to bring to the table as part of your crisis response. Well, there are two other people I want you to bring to the table. The first one is the head of your business continuity management program, and the second one is the affected business owner for whatever systems have been impacted by this attack. So let's say it was a situation where the HRIS system was down. I want the head of HR, who's probably already at the table anyhow, but I want the head of HR to come to the table and be part of the discussion. So there are four things that having this integration will help with. The first one is it's going to help you understand much more efficiently which business functions are affected by whatever systems are down. We're building business continuity plans every day that address a system down event. And when a cyber attack happens and it takes systems down, we're executing that business continuity plan. And having that business owner at the table to tell us, yeah, look, without that system, we can't do this, and that. That's going to be way more efficient if they're right there at the table. It also allows that business owner to talk to the technology team and say, listen, remember from our BIAs, our recovery time objectives here are, 4 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours. So the second thing that can happen is that technology and business can have that conversation in a hopefully controlled setting that the crisis lead is facilitating, and then the technology person can come back to the business and say, listen, this isn't just your average little disaster here, not that they ever are, but we're not going to meet that 24-hour RTO. We're looking at 4 days here. And so then, understanding what business functions are affected, the business lead can communicate the impact back. And so that's the third thing. It gives a clear understanding of the impact of that downtime. Listen, if that system's going to be down for 4 days, then I'm not going to make these three deadlines. What's the impact of that? Well, we're going to have reputational impact here. We're probably going to face some fines here, whatever it turns out to be. But by having business continuity sort of at the table, they can understand all of this data that you've collected anyhow. That's one of my biggest pet peeves coming out of a BIA is we collect all this data, then nobody ever does anything with it. So this gives you an opportunity to use it. And then the last thing is understanding the prioritization of those critical business functions and those critical activities. Because that conversation around how long it's going to take to get systems back up allows the business owners to say, wow, man, we got to start working on a workaround for this so we can at least get something done. So just to kind of sum that up in 15 seconds, bring that business owner to the table. You'll have a better understanding of what functions are involved. You'll understand recovery time objectives versus capability. You'll understand impact, and you'll understand prioritization of the business functions.
And I just want to add, I guess, by adding that business owner, or if they're not already a part of it, getting them there so they can, confirm that, yes, it's a Tuesday of the third month, which means, we are going to get fined, lets them know that, but we may not get fined if I give a notification to that client who we deliver that file to or whatever right now and give them a heads up of what's happening.
Yeah, that's right. No, hey, look, we're not going to meet that SLA, so we better get on that right now and start to mitigate that. Think about all of the different moving pieces here, right? Let's say you have a ransom demand against a certain deadline for payment. So that's one piece. You have technology working feverishly to try to recover. Hopefully they're giving you some estimates of, recovery time. So you're measuring that against the deadline. But then over in this corner, you're measuring your recovery time objectives and the impact of downtime against the business. So these three pieces of information are swirling together to try to help you make better decisions.
And the fourth thing, and we've only got 2 minutes for it, by the way, 4 things you can do now.
So the first thing you can do is identify your default positions to key decisions that you're going to have to make. Start thinking now about who do you need to communicate with. What are your reporting requirements from a data privacy perspective? Are you likely to pay ransom? Are you likely to engage law enforcement? Those types of things. The next thing is, and we've talked about it, evaluate your cyber insurance position. Do you have it? Do you need it? What are your needs? What are your limits? What are your exclusions? Those things. The third thing is get busy. This is a lot of work, but it's extremely valuable. Establish a cyber-focused communication strategy right now. Just like we anticipate key decisions, anticipate your communication requirements during a cyber attack, all the way down to, and this is a gold tip right here, all the way down to anticipate questions that your spokesperson is likely going to be asked and start to build effective responses for that. Do that now. Don't let it catch you off guard. And the last thing is document a cyber response plan where you put all of this together. And then when you get it documented, please exercise it.
Yeah, exactly. That, especially that last one there. Now,
right.
Do you have any, let's give you an extra minute here, any closing thoughts, any final thoughts you'd like to pass on to everybody?
In the world of COVID, a lot of business continuity people are concerned about the perceived value that they have on their organization. So to those people, I would say this: go add value. I heard someone say one time they don't like to use the phrase new normal because we don't know yet what the new normal will be. So go inject yourself into the culture of your organization and define the new normal. Execute thought leadership, lead your company, do what you do, demonstrate value, and that will take care of that perception of the lack of value that you're bringing to the organization.
And I think that's a great place to end today's show. Mark, I want to thank you very much for your sharing your time and your expertise with us.
My pleasure. This has been fun. I can't believe that it's over already. Let's go again.
I know time goes by much quicker than people think when you're recording it.
No kidding.
But thank you. I really do appreciate you sharing your time and expertise with us. And I'm sure everyone that attended CRT and listened to you had a very, hopefully, eye-opening experience as well. And they take some of these, especially I like the 4x4 thing. It's so easy to remember. I hope they take that back with them.
Such an important topic, and I hope people are taking it seriously because you don't want to get caught off guard with this.
Exactly. So thank you again. And everybody that's out there, if you want to be on the show or advertise, please feel free to get in touch with me. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.